When I first meet people, I often say, they shake hands, try to make eye contact, smile, try to make you laugh. But anybody who's ever met me knows that I will interrogate you the first time that I met you. I'll ask you a question, and you're 5 words into answering the question. I interrupt you and ask you another question. And it's like, can you relax? Can you let me talk? It's like, no, because what I'm doing is trying to find something that makes you tick, that's going to make you comfortable in whatever space that I'm in. And then once that's good, then I'm like, so tell me about your family, tell me about your passions. And so that's how that's kind of flowed all these years.
You're listening to Stories from the Top, an inside guide to better business development. So we're here with Pete Reinke. He is a super connector from the Lehigh Valley and also known as the godfather of networking. So we're very excited. Pete, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to introduce yourself and some of your background?
Sure. Pete Reinke. I've been a 35-year resident of Easton, Pennsylvania, but grew up in Philadelphia in the city, 27 years in the same house. Most of my career was commercial real estate, economic development. Early in life, I had a 5-year sabbatical as a college basketball coach. And most recently, I had 5 years in the banking industry, which I left in January.
Great. So how did this all get started? What was your original schooling? What were you thinking you were going to do for a career?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I grew up in Philadelphia. As I said, my dad was a private school teacher. And so I went to 2 schools that are pretty well known regionally and nationally, Penn Charter and then Germantown Friends. Went to PC from kindergarten to 7th. And in 7th grade, my dad was a finalist to be the head of the school, and it went to somebody else. And so we literally went down the school to GFS, where I graduated. So I went from 8th to 12th at GFS. And it was funny because I had 3 generations of family members that had gone to GFS. It was the first time at the age of 14 that I was at school with girls, which is a really good experience for me. And all through that time, I just played basketball and soccer. They recently did a thing at my high school, and it was, asking what activities were you involved in high school? And I said, basketball and soccer. They said, well, did you see all the other options? It's like, no, I did see them, and that's all I did. So that was my beginning time. I went to college at Lafayette up in Easton. So that was the first time I had come to the Lehigh Valley. Loved that, graduated in 1985. And then went back to Philly for 5 years and worked in commercial real estate. And I don't know, I didn't ask you guys, are you both of you sports fans at all?
A little bit, yeah. I follow the Eagles and Phillies a little bit.
Yeah, I cheer for the Eagles.
Okay. Yeah. So we get a lot of that, but I played sports. And so in 1990, after I'd been working in real estate for 5 years, the old assistant coach from Lafayette, a guy named John Leone, I'd been the manager of the team. So I lived with the guys that played hoops and stuff like that. And he called me and he said, do you want to come back to your alma mater to coach basketball as a job? Which I almost thought was a joke, and it wasn't. And so for 5 years, I coached Division I men's basketball and assistant coach. I met my wife there. And it was funny, if you're sharing stories, this cute blonde-haired girl walks into the gym one day, and I looked at her and like, oh, shoot, she's got a wedding ring on. And it turned out that she was going through a divorce, and so it prevented me from going out with her for a couple of months. But then I broke her down,
Sealed the deal, yeah.
And Mary and I have been together ever since. 30-some years. So,
wow.
So it's I credit Lafayette with a lot of things: a great education, the college thing, and most of all, my Mary. That's how I met her.
That's amazing. Were you always like an outgoing people person? Was that something that like excited you, or is that something you kind of developed in business?
So again, since this is a place to tell stories, the story that I always share that's one of the most formative things in my life is my first day at GFS in 8th grade. I walk into the first class I've ever been, have a book bag, and one of the girls in the room literally says, "Ew, it's Pete Reinke." And the school bully walked over, picked up my book bag and threw it out the second floor window. And I sat there for a minute, and the teacher walked in. I raised my hand. I said, I put my book bag in the window. It fell out. I'm sorry. Can I go get it? And she said, sure. I walked downstairs, got my books, came back in. And by the time that homeroom was over, 4 or 5 guys came up and said, that was awesome. Like, you didn't bend down to that bully, and you stood up for yourself. And so from that moment is when I felt that I could engage with other people, because I was a newcomer at that school. My high school class had 80 kids, about 40 boys and 40 girls. It was 1981, so what's that, 45 years ago or whatever. And of those 80 people, it's about half and half boys and girls. 14 of the 40 of us are still inseparable to this day. And one lives in Japan, one lives on the West Coast, a couple guys down south and stuff like that. And so they were from all walks of life. And so from that moment, I was always somebody where I could be comfortable with anybody. And to this day, I always go out of my way to make sure that everybody else is comfortable. If you're super shy, if this is your first time ever in a new community, I'll walk up and kind of, hey, you good? And it's like somebody's like, I have no idea what's going on. It's like, well, come follow me. And so that's been a real important part of my life. When somebody says, how can you make a life networking and connecting? Like, I think I've done pretty well with it. So
yeah. When did you get started in sales and business development stuff?
Yeah. So again, I did commercial real estate right out of college. And then when I was coaching basketball, I always tell people, people don't realize athletics is something where you do a lot of salesmanship. So I recruited student athletes. And so you would go and call into people's houses and stuff like that. I'm so old that in the early 90s, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have all these other things. But one of the lessons that I learned from that early experience was, I was 27 or 28 years old, and you would call somebody up and the phone would ring and the parent would answer and you say, Mr. Schmidt, how you doing? Can I talk to Tony, who was your son? And immediately get excited about it. Well, sometimes it would turn out that I had interrupted the Schmidt's dinner time. And so instead of feeling great about Lafayette, they're like, who is that jerk son that just called in? So to this moment, whenever I call somebody, I was like, did I catch you at a good time? Even when it's a setup time, because you never know when somebody has a client issue, a family issue, or whatever. And so that started, and then recruiting, you're selling people on your school. So you had to know not just what you did with basketball, what you did with academically, what opportunities exist for career after your college years and stuff like that. So that's where I started in sales. And then when I left that and went back to commercial real estate, I basically did commercial real estate brokerage and development, which is just a flat out sales job. The most time I spent in my career was doing economic development. And again, economic development, I managed people, but it was recruiting businesses. I worked for Governor Rendell for a couple of years and his action team, and recruited people into Berks, Monroe, Lehigh, and Northampton County, kind of the outer ring of the 5-county Philly area. And then I spent a decade at the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation, which is a fantastic entity under the auspices of a guy named Don Cunningham now, who they're nationally known. The reputation of what they developed is great. And again, that was selling people on a region, not just on a property or anything like that. So
for that economic development, you're calling on businesses, asking them to relocate their headquarters into that county? Or?
Yeah. And so it was these things where I did a lot of traveling to different conferences around the country. One of my most enjoyable things ever was I went by myself to Israel and Germany for a couple of weeks to recruit businesses here. And sadly, one of the great disappointments of my life is I speak nothing but English. And so Reinke is a German name. So I go over to Germany for a week and I couldn't speak any German, and people were just kind enough to take me under their wing and do that. But I did a lot of that work and successfully brought some companies in here. One of the stories I've been sharing a lot related to my whole Friends of Pete and the connecting thing was when I was doing that work, there was a business over in New Jersey that a young man had started in his parents' garage. It sounds like a Silicon Valley kind of story. And it was, I think it was called United Bank Card or United Jersey Bank Card. And that young man's name was Jared Isaacman. And I went over with somebody else and we recruited them from Jersey into Pennsylvania. And I don't know if Jared Isaacman, if that name sounds familiar to you guys, but he's the guy, he's the CEO of a company called Shift4, but he was the person, he went into space. He's now a billionaire. He was going to be President Trump's NASA secretary until Musk and Trump had an issue. And so when I say about knowing people and having a certain connection, I'm friends with some of Jared's people at his company Shift4 now. I haven't seen Jared Isaacman in 20 years, but my friend over there, told him the story. So I remember Pete's the reason I came to Pennsylvania. Oh, and wow. So it's just, you kind of see those things that when I say I have a tie to everybody, it's like, you never know. And it's one of the stories that I like to share.
So what is it that motivates a business to pick up and move to an area like Pennsylvania?
So it's always interesting, when I was first starting that work again 30 years ago, candidly, it was both availability of land, but everybody, who has any family members who's ever been in real estate, it's what drives real estate is location, location, location. And the plain fact of the matter is that we were close to New York and New York City and to Pennsylvania were easily accessible because of our roadway system. Not a lot of people know this that aren't kind of in the business, but the ports of New York and of Newark and Elizabeth and stuff like that, things come into the port there, and then they directly go on Norfolk Southern rail lines directly to Chicago, and that cuts right through the Lehigh Valley. So part of what we always used to say was we were cheating a little bit. When you see you're patting yourself on the back, it's like we had all that was out there. It used to be plentiful land and cheaper land. The land, there's not much land available up by us now. It's not as cheap as it once was. So now it's sort of going up into Carbon and Schuylkill counties and places like that that are further afield. But this is a place that is close to the entire country. There's something that people didn't know. If you're a big warehouse company, a logistics company, and again, this precedes Amazon and all these other things, but you want to get to the entire state, country of the United States. There were 5 places you would go. You go to Los Angeles, you would go to Dallas, you would go to Atlanta, you would go to Chicago, and then you would go to what they used to call Exit 8A and the New Jersey Turnpike in North Jersey. And then that got so expensive and there were labor things and stuff like that. And so that has now become the Lehigh Valley. So if you talk to a company in Europe or Asia, or, South America or Africa or whatever, and they need to be in the U.S., and you say, well, I'm from the Lehigh Valley, I'm from Eastern Pennsylvania, they're not looking it up. They're like, oh, do you know this project? Do you know this company? And so it was a lot of location work is what drove it.
So when did you realize that networking was something that you wanted to take more than a tool in your belt, but actually make it something that you're bringing other people into, connecting small businesses, large businesses? When did you start building, Friends of Pete?
So probably 15 years ago, and it was when I was working at LVEDC. And again, we used to do these events all the time. And I started going out at the time. My Mary and I don't have kids. And so I was out a lot in the evenings. And she and a couple of the other wives and husbands were like, why are you guys out all the time? And so a friend of mine, Bud Hackett, who's one of my closest friends to this day, not Buddy Hackett, the comedian, but Bud Hackett from Bethlehem, he said, let's put something on our calendars. And so he said, well, what's going to be? And it was Friends of Pete. He said FOP. And it was like, that was in honor of me. There was about half a dozen of us that got together. And my Mary has some family in law enforcement. And so every day that you're putting stuff on your calendar, every week I was having 1 or 2 FOP meetings. And pretty quickly she's like, Peter, the Fraternal Order of Police does not have an event every week. And I go, well, why would you think it was Fraternal Order of Police? Well, it says FOP. It's like, oh, that's me. That's Friends of Pete. And so she was rolling her eyes at me. This is way back when. And so what it basically grew into was, it was a economic development and Chamber of Commerce. We have an awesome Chamber of Commerce in the Lehigh Valley, the Greater Lehigh Valley Chamber of Commerce, and they have big events. So you'd have an event, the event's over, and then people would retire to the bar, and then you just get a beer or a glass of wine or a soda, and then they're like, well, we're closing up now. And so it was like, hey, let's go across the street to whatever place. So that's really how I started doing events.
It's like the after party.
Yeah, and it was an after party for a while, and it was fun. And then after a couple of years, it got to the point where people were just going to the after party. And that was not you wanted people to come and celebrate the wins that we had economic development wise and stuff like that. When I left economic development and went back to commercial real estate, we just started doing these monthly events. And so it was, again, Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. We would rotate it. We do it on a Thursday night. The parameters of our Friends of Pete happy hour is it's every man and woman for themselves. There's no cost. There's no speaker. There's no name tags. You just show up. I have been fortunate enough to develop great relationships with restaurants and breweries and distilleries and wineries because of that. And so we would do that, and it had a good flow to it. Now, today in 2025, we probably get 150 people, 125 people at every happy hour. So it's pretty big. When COVID hit, we said, let's add a little more impact. And so came up with the idea of doing lunch and learns. And so now every month I do a lunch and learn. And the lunch and learns we try to do at a college or university or at a smaller venue for entrepreneurs and stuff like that. Those tend to be 30, 40 people. We've got sponsors for that for a while. And now last year, maybe a year and a half ago, we decided let's just charge $15 to cover lunch. And then people get to come in. So we've added that. So through those couple of things, through Friends of Pete, I have the lunch and learn and the happy hour. That's what I've been doing.
So what have you taken as your career is kind of shifting? What has been the value you're getting out of running Friends of Pete and just connecting with all these people?
So again, it's knowing people. Again, people are always asking you, they want to compensate for that. People would ask me when I'd host these happy hours, well, you and your wife must eat free all the time and stuff like that. It's like, it wasn't offered, and I wouldn't have accepted it. What I get out of it is the joy of making people comfortable. But in addition to doing the networking that I run, I go to a lot of other events. And people always ask you to briefly describe yourself. And I've been saying, I was disappointed when I lost my job at Univest in January. But for the last couple of years, when somebody had asked me what you do other than being Mary's husband, I would say 4 things. And Univest was always the 4th thing, not the first thing. And so I would say I'm involved with Friends of Pete for networking. Then I'm involved with something which is really cool that I don't know if you two know about, but it's something called 1 Million Cups. 1 Million Cups was started by the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, and it's a weekly event for entrepreneurs. There's about 120 chapters around the country. We host one in Bethlehem at Northampton Community College, and we get about 50 or 60 people there every week. And of the 120 chapters in the country, we've been consistently in the top 3 in attendance and engagement. So I say 1 million cups to support entrepreneurs. Then I told Matt, I started something with a couple other friends, Seth Rubin, Dave Myers, David Carley, CJ Jenkin. I always want to share who it is because it's not just me. And we started this thing in October for job seekers. And so it was Lehigh Valley Job Seekers, and we called it 1 Million Opportunities, and it was every Monday morning we would bring together people and share what you're each looking for in terms of jobs. We now bring in speakers to share job tips, and it's been really good. Sadly, one of the things now is that you probably get 20 people every week that are looking for that, and it's one of the few places in my life. People always talk when you say goodbye to your loved ones. Every night when I say good night to my mom, I say love you or whatever. And my thing has always been see you later. And one of the only times any groups of people I deal with that I don't like to say see you later is this 1 Million Opportunities. If I haven't seen Matt in a while and he was a regular attendee at 1 Million Opportunities, I'm assuming it's because you have a job. And so that's a good reason not to see you. And so that group is helping job seekers. And then something that I've done for probably the last decade that's extraordinarily important in my life, and it's been unique in the Lehigh Valley, and I think we should have it in other areas. It's something called LINC, L-I-N-C. And what we've done with LINC is our 2 biggest employers are the hospital networks, Lehigh Valley, now Jefferson, St. Luke's that's now acquired Grandview. And then we're blessed in the Lehigh Valley to have 11 colleges and universities. And so those 11 colleges and universities, and then maybe our dozen largest employers. And for you guys down here next, and it's thinking about Olympus, Crayola, Air Products, Lutron, PPL, companies like that people know. And those companies, the colleges and the 2 hospital networks, they pay into LINC. And what LINC does is somebody's in California and gets a job. Matt gets to be a job. He's an established surgeon in California. He comes to Lehigh Valley, and you're excited, and the hospital's excited, but your significant other and your kids are not. And so what LINC does is reaches out to your spouse and says, where do you guys want to live? What type of neighborhood did you live in California? What activities do the kids do? What kind of school district do you want to be in? And so it's this wonderful way of making people who are new to an area feel immediately that they have a synergy with some folks that have been here maybe their entire lives. And so, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I say that the networking thing helps me with people looking for jobs, young people from colleges, people that are out of work, and people that are new to the area. And so that's a formula that we've had success with in the Lehigh Valley, but that I think any community should do if they want to make people feel engaged and welcome.
What has been your strategy to grow the group? Is it just word of mouth at this point, or do you still actively work to?
So I always laugh about that, and I say it's proactive because I'll talk to friends and they'll say, I want to set up a Friends of Pete. I want to have a Friends of Matt. And I said one of the things that's so interesting about doing this is, I said, well, all you do is you reach out to your family, you reach out to the people you grew up with, your high school friends, your college friends, your current work colleagues, and your clients and your current neighbors and all this stuff, and you invite them in the same room. And then you just let it, then you let them do their thing from there. And so he said, oh, that sounds awesome. I said, well, it does, until most human beings think about the stories that you tell your high school buddies are different than the stories you tell your wife. And it's almost, again, like doing a podcast or doing, a movie or something like that. And it's like, well, somebody's going to out you when you say something that's wrong. And I said, you could, the joke was always, you could try to catch me in a lie. It's not going to happen. You might embellish or tweak something a little bit, but the thing is coming together. And so that's what we really try to do. At those events that I do, my closest group of friends rarely come, because you never talk to us, you just talk to the new people. And so I'll usually either sit by the door, or in some of the bigger events, the restaurants will be like, there's a bottleneck here, go sit in the corner, Pete. Mm-hmm. And then I sit there, and then I'll look and I'd say, I don't know who that person is. I haven't met them before. And then they come over and hi, are you Pete? I'm like, yes, I am. It's like, whatever. And they said, well, what do you do? And the formula to answer that question is that when I first meet people, I often say, obviously shake hands, try to make eye contact, smile, try to make you laugh. But anybody who's ever met me knows that I will interrogate you the first time that I met you. And I'll ask you questions. And it's funny talking to the two of you this morning, because you'll ask a question and let me ramble. I'm the exact opposite. I'll ask you a question and you're 5 words into answering the question. I interrupt you and ask you another question. And it's like, can you relax? Can you let me talk? It's like, no, because what I'm doing is trying to find something that makes you tick, that's going to make you comfortable in whatever space that I'm in. And then once that's good, then I'm like, so tell me about your family, tell me about your passions. And so that's how that's kind of flowed all these years.
So with meeting all these people, do you just kind of naturally remember all these people, or do you have a database? Or
so I'm pretty good at doing that. It was always funny because, again, when I was at the bank, before I was at the bank, I spent 6 great years working for a family-run real estate business called Ashley Development. It's Lou Pector and his daughter Lisa and other family members. And, you'd use different CRMs. So I'd always plug things into a CRM. But to this day, and I think you guys know, I'm one of these people, one of the few people that I know that I'm maxed out on LinkedIn. There's 30,000 connections and I'm at 30,000. So mostly what I do is I add people, whenever I meet somebody, I ask them for their cell phone number. I said, I'm not going to harass you. I'm not going to sell it or share it. But what I'm going to do is every month for my Friends of Pete events, I'll send you a text and I'll do this. So I try to remember where everybody is. If I forget, people are kind enough to tell me. I'll come over and I'll start talking to somebody. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I thought you were this person. But it doesn't happen a lot. And you try to remember something about somebody that makes them tick. And that's how I make it work.
Do you have any goals or plans to grow or change the dynamics of Friends of Pete moving forward?
Yeah, so that's a really great and timely question. So as I said, I lost my job in January. I just turned 62, and people are like, oh, you're going to retire or whatever. I'm somebody, well, I'll never retire, but I want to work full time at least for the next 10 years. And when you're talking to young people, in different audiences, people think, full time is 40 hours. To me, it's always been 50 or 60. It's not like some entrepreneurs that I know that full time is 80 or 100 hours. I'm good with 50 or 60. Mm-hmm. And so I want to do that for a long period of time. I'm currently talking about making Friends of Pete a single member LLC. And then what I'm going to do is do some referral work for connecting people to businesses and getting compensated for it, running some events outside of my 2 monthly Friends of Pete. And then eventually we've talked about doing almost a membership thing. So you become a member as a person, as a company, and then posting things. Again, doing what we're doing now. I love doing this and supporting and giving a voice to things, but having people post their podcast or their videos onto the group and then share it out. So those are some of the things that I'm working with. I have a really great partner, a guy named Seth Rubin, who's both in the solar industry business with Bright Star Solar, Bright Star Energy, but he also has done something that was really unique, and that was 6 or 9 months ago, he created something called Network Lehigh Valley, and it's an online directory of networking events. And so now when somebody's starting a networking group for 5 people, we'll post it here and then we share it. And so he and I have had some really good synergies in terms of just promoting, because it's an odd thing when you hear about Friends of Pete, you think it's self-promoting, it's more self-deprecating than it is self-promoting. What I want to do is promote Edge of Cinema and promote whoever else that I see if they want to. And then sometimes feel like I don't need to be promoted. It's like, that's fine. If you change your mind, let me know. If you truly don't want to self-promote, that's cool, I guess. So anyway.
Well, if anybody wants to check out Friends of Pete or get involved, what's the best way? Not on LinkedIn, I guess, right?
So we were laughing because, again, what we've done over the years is there are groups. So people use different kinds of social media. So there is a LinkedIn group called Friends of Pete. There's a Facebook group called Friends of Pete, and there's been a meetup group called Friends of Pete that we're tweaking a little bit. But you can go and join that. So even if you can't connect via directly within LinkedIn, you can join that group. And then the big thing is just, ask a friend and email me or whatever. And then once I have your number, just tell me who you want to meet, because I think that's the great joy of my thing. People will say, I want to meet new clients. That's not how my mind works. You have to say, give me some company names or individual names. And then once you do that, that's who I'll reach out to. And then I'm curious enough that I'll do a little checking and say, well, I reached out to the 3 people that you asked me, but would this person be the right client for you? And what's great about all the people that I know is people respond and say, Pete, that's not quite right. Or they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know who that is. And then they run with it. So that's how to connect.
Okay, great. Yeah, I always remember like our first meeting, you sat down, basically interrogated me. I gave you a million hopes, dreams, goals for business and personal. And you said, okay, yeah, I know something like that. Yeah, and there was like an email with like 10 people you connected me with. So it was awesome.
I had a fun thing a couple of years ago. I was at an event in Philadelphia because now I really, like, my wife and I, we don't travel much at all. We like being in the Lehigh Valley, and I don't do things in the evenings at all. So I'll do day stuff in North Jersey or down in suburban Philly, but at night, I'm home. You can catch me on the phone or online or whatever, but I'm not out and I used to be. But, somebody had this great compliment to me that I walked into some event, and you sort of walk in a certain way. It's like, people are like, who's that guy? It's like, oh, that's Pete. Why? It's like, well, he looks like he owns the place or whatever. And you're not trying to come off with a false feeling, but I just walk in because I'm confident, because I'm assuming I'm going to see people that I know. And when I don't, so often I think what feeds this whole thing is being relentlessly curious, and I'll hear about something that you're doing or somebody else is doing, and I often try to reach out and just say, hey, I'm Pete, if I can ever help you. And somebody's like, who? And then eventually they're like, oh, you're the networking person, you did this, and then you make those connections. So that's I think how that flows.
Yeah, what's one piece of advice you'd give to somebody who wants to expand their networks?
The answer to that question is something that I'm fortunate enough to talk to college kids all the time, and it's like, show up and give a bleep. It's like, just put yourself out there, show up, and then ask and reach out to people who you don't already know. And if somebody says, well, I'm not really good at that, then I always say, tag around me, or I find a friend who's super outgoing, just follow them and then make that. But the whole thing is to just show up and ask. And that's a very simple formula, but it's one that works.
Great. Well, Pete, thanks so much for coming on the show. We have another episode coming up where we're going to just dive into the strategies and mechanics of how to actually effectively network for business. So,
sounds good.
Thanks again for coming on the show.
Stories from the Top is your guide to successful business development. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or find Edge of Cinema on YouTube. Stories from the Top is an Edge of Cinema production, hosted by Matthew Skura and Jeremy Schmidt. To learn more or get in touch, visit edgeofcinema.com/podcast.